Ashwini.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon per the time zone you are in. Maybe very good morning or a late evening as well. That's why we just say good day. Welcome to the panel discussion today with Cyberbahn and SAI, Scaled Agile Inc. We are going to talk about virtual agile global delivery model. We were thinking about what happened in the last 1 year plus and what is beyond 2021. What do we see the business models or operating models that we would have? I'm Ashwini Kalkura. I'm a principal consultant with Cyberbahn. I think most of you know me because you are our clients. And we wanted to make it exclusive, invite-only a panel discussion. And with that said, I would allow Pranjal and Andy to introduce themselves.
Andy, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Pranjal. Yeah, well, really good to meet everyone. So my name's Andy Sales. I'm a SAFE Fellow and member of the framework team here at Scaled Agile. Thanks to Ashwini for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and really looking forward to sharing some of the things that we've done at Scaled Agile, and we've also seen Safe Enterprises do to manage and mitigate some of the challenges. Also happy to talk about how the framework itself is needed to adapt slightly to these different ways of working.
Thanks, Andy. And I'm Pranjal Swarup. I'm the country manager for Scaled Agile in the region. And I'm so happy to be part of this panel discussion as a moderator. And I really appreciate all of you taking time today to be part of this panel discussion as well. And since I would be the moderator, let me take this opportunity to introduce the agenda for today, which is broadly categorized under 3 different broad topics. We are going to discuss the disruption in the customer-centric recovery. So this is like a backward looking to 2020 and how we recovered from there on. We would also spend some time talking about the new meaning of collaboration in the virtual delivery model that we all are part of. And then what could be those recommendations around transforming the operating model, the approach that the global delivery organizations are taking, and we will share some experience. We are recording this, so this should be available to all of us later. We want this to be more of a sharing session, not just a dialogue between Ashwini and I and Andy. So we would encourage you to share your thoughts and share your experience as well. And how I would intend to do this is that with each and every topic, as we come to the that topic, we would open up it to you for you to share your thoughts and your stories. So you might want to unmute yourself and share. And also, until that happens, you might want to keep yourself on mute so that we can keep the background noise to the minimum. Also, feel free to keep on pouring in your questions as and when you have. Don't keep them to yourself. I'll be watching the chat window too. So in the chat window, just feel free to put your questions as and when they come to your mind. Right now, with that, I guess let me bring it to you, Andy. You know, last year was a remarkable year. We all saw a dramatic shift in the ways of working. A lot of things changed. A lot of industries were challenged. And I guess all of us felt that. We made some recovery, but I guess that allowed us to look into different things from when it comes down to servicing our globally distributed teams and customers. So when you look back, would you want to share some of your experiences and impact that you would have seen in beginning of 2020 and how that came about?
Yeah, I'd be really happy to do that. And actually what I'm going to do is I just put a few slides together to help illustrate a little bit of a story. Now, this is a fairly personal story. This is a story about the effect of the disruption that Pranjal mentioned on Scaled Agile. And, you know, the backdrop here really, before I explain the slide, although the slide doesn't really need much explaining, is that we were an organization built around predominantly in-person training events. So Agile talks a lot about face-to-face communication. It talks a lot about collaboration. Running these in-person classroom-based training events is a great way not only to upskill people, but also build some of those interactions that we know are successful to and conducive to successful Agile. And then what happened? Well, based on the timeframes that Pranjal mentioned, in March last year, the whole business, as you can see from this graph, really dropped off a cliff. We weren't able to deliver the in-person classes, and we had no mechanism for providing the information and the knowledge to learners apart from the in-person environment. So if you were a leader at that time, if this graph doesn't grab your attention, nothing really will. This really was a bit of an existential crisis for Scaled Agile, and we needed to respond, and we needed to respond quickly. So some of the things that we did and some of the learnings that we took away, the first thing we did was engage with our customers. So we started talking to them, working with them, understanding what a solution might look like. And we decided to put in place both a go short strategy and a go long strategy. And our thinking here was we need to respond quickly to the immediate threat, but then we also need to make those changes part of the longer ways of working of the organization and actually fold them into a more intentional strategy longer term. I won't go through all the details here, but I'll call a few things out. The big thing, of course, is that first bullet point, moving all of our curriculum to remote learning, providing an opportunity for people to teach and consume classes in a remote environment, building and making available a collaboration platform so those interactions could take place, and then thinking about how can we support some of the key events such as PI planning. What does it look like to run those in a distributed manner? And what resources do our SPCs and our safe practitioners need to do that successfully? The one thing that you'll see on the left that we put a lot of effort into was the communication. So 8 different ways of communicating and doing it 8 times. So just making sure that we were getting the message out to our customers in an ongoing manner. And then, of course, longer term, rolling out those benefits to the entire curriculum, improving the offerings, continue to support remote teaching and events through digital classrooms and digital collaboration tools. And although looking back now, it's kind of become the norm, this was a massive shift in the way that we worked. And one of the things that when I look back and reflect that was beneficial to us was the way we were able to propagate some of these strategy changes through the organization. Some of you may know, but maybe everyone isn't aware, that we actually use SAFe to run the business. So we're about 160 people at Scaled Agile. We run as a single Agile release train, and we have an LPM function on top of that. You'd recognize it from all the safe practices that you see, that you practice yourselves. We try and adhere to those as much as possible. And although we knew that a lot of work emerges at the team level, features are being defined by product management within the Agile release trains, we also need this way of propagating big strategic changes like the ones I mentioned across and through the organization. So we were really starting to put SAFe to the test. New epics were coming into the portfolio Kanban. They were being quickly broken down and decomposed into features. They were finding their way into the team backlog in terms of stories. And because we had this connected system of backlogs and Kanbans, we were able to really propagate these strategic changes very quickly. The other thing that I know we're going to talk about today in this panel discussion is how you reorganize to actually meet some of these strategic changes. We had to spin up 4 brand new teams that were formed around these particular initiatives that you saw represented in the strategy. So we were really reorganizing our development value streams around the things that we needed to work on. And by giving these teams that dedicated mission, aligning them to specific goals, it then became much easier and quicker for us to actually execute that strategy. And this worked really, really well. And then finally, of course, and everyone's aware of this on this call, one of the things in reflection that really helped us was that we do PI planning and we do it on a cadence. So although we know some of these disruptions come out of nowhere, we also know that every 10 to 12 weeks, we're going to have the whole organization together with an opportunity to replan, realign around the strategy, and hear from our leadership, what are the things we need to do. So I remember, and you probably do Pranjal very well, the PI planning that came after the disruption hit us and how we focused everything around 4 key themes. We got the whole organization moving in one direction. And I think that was one of the reasons we were able to navigate out of this huge, huge disruption back to something that was closer to the ways of working, the ways of interacting with our learners that we experience today. And although it's a nice story and it has a nice ending, I don't want to underplay the fact that when we were in the middle of it, this was a scary time. It was a huge disruption. And thankfully, with the tools that I mentioned, we were able to come through it fairly unscathed. If there was one thing I'd kind of just finish on before passing it to Ashwini to share his thoughts, it's this slide here. One of the things we had to do that I think was the hardest was actually stop some of the other initiatives we had in flight. And this idea of ignoring sunk costs, actually not getting too attached to money that you've already spent, work that you've already done, is probably one of the key things to help organizations navigate to what it is they need to be working on. The flip side of this is you become too attached to the current projects you have in flight, and you don't allow yourselves to let go of those and focus on the things that you need to work on to implement today's strategy. There were lots and lots of great projects we had in flight. Unfortunately, they had to be put to one side, and we had to realign everyone around exactly the things that I've shown you. So really looking forward to diving into the detail, telling you a little bit more about the story. That's a very, very quick summary just of the things that we experienced firsthand at Scaled Agile. So hopefully that was useful. Pranjal, back to you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's like throwback times. I could relate to all those things back in March and April, and then 5 PI plannings since then, distributed and still going on. I think we have come a long way. So thanks for sharing that experience, Andy. Ashwini, how did you experience this dramatic shift?
I'll connect to Andrew's story, like just before getting onto this call, right? So we were talking about it. I still remember March 12th and 13th, which was a Thursday and a Friday. I went to the last face-to-face class in 2020, right? So even on that day, my temperature was checked, and I had to declare, okay, did I travel in the last 1 month outside of India and stuff? So that was the last class. And after that, the whole month I didn't have a class, right? So, or even the consulting assignments, many of them were put on hold too. Right. So the customers were also going through that journey of rearranging themselves and realigning themselves to the new reality. And like Andy said, even I have seen the shift at the customer end, our own customer end, that whoever took this as a challenge and ignored their sunk costs and looked at this as an opportunity to change the way they operate, they have survived. I think all of them are on this call as well, right? So they have stories, great stories to tell too, right? And in fact, we also had to look at the tools that we had even after the online class became a reality. I still remember attending one of those first sessions with Bima and Audrey, where we didn't have too many collaboration tools, but we started with, let's use Google Drive and share the slides and at least show that slides to everyone, and then people can collaboratively work. We started from there. And if I look back today, the ground that we have covered is enormous, right? So I'm excited to speak about some of those practices, patterns, and values that we saw in this whole journey.
Absolutely. I still remember, it felt like a patchwork at that point of time. And then, of course, I think it was important at that point of time to ensure that there is, absolutely minimal or maybe just zero customer disruption. And then we improvised. And then, of course, we are in this world where there's plethora of collaboration tools and opportunities to collaborate. And we'll go into more details. But I'll come back to you, Andy. One of the things that when you started sharing, one of the keywords that stood out to me was customer. And I think customer centricity is in the middle of Scaled Agile framework. We always talk about customer centricity. Would you want to share a bit about what do we mean by customer centricity? Why is it important? And why would this be important for any organization to respond better to any disruption which is caused like we have experienced just now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we introduced customer centricity in SAFe 5, January last year. And if we think about the goal of SAFe just for a minute, the goal is to deliver innovative business solutions to our customers. We can be as innovative as we like, but if we're not delighting those customers, we're not going to see the outcomes or the success in the market. So we need to keep customers central to everything that we do. Customer centricity is really a mindset. It's saying that every time we make a decision, we make it with the customer in mind. We try and empathize with the way customers feel, the challenges they have, the needs that they have to use our products to solve those particular needs and problems. And when I think, Pranjal, to your question, why is it that customer centricity and customer-centric organizations are so well positioned to respond to disruption? I think it's a few things. So number one is customer-centric organizations are really what I would call research-driven. So as they're making decisions about their new products, they're doing it with the customer needs in mind. If they don't know what those customer needs are, they're going out and exploring and finding them. They're really de-risking a lot of their product development decisions by having good data and good analysis. And although no one could have predicted the disruption we saw in March last year, what these research-driven companies can do is start to predict some of the ongoing changes to their products and start to think about how they need to continually adapt and evolve their products to meet those changes. But the second thing I think, which is the real important thing here, is customer-centric organizations maintain relationships with their customers. And what I mean by that is when they deliver a product, they follow up, they understand how that product serves the customer through its lifetime. They work with other customer groups to help explore new products and new opportunities. So when something like we saw in March last year landed, we at Scaled Agile, for example, already had groups of customers available. We call them focus groups, ready and willing to engage with us to think about how we can navigate through this disruption. So we weren't frantically looking for who can we talk to, who's going to help us understand what we need to do. We simply drew down on those existing customer relationships and worked with them in partnership to help us navigate out of this crisis. And I think it's those relationships, those long-term relationships, that are really central here to getting out of something like we saw in March last year.
Yeah, interesting. Curious to know about how you experienced this, Ashwini, with all the customers that you have been working with. Did you see them reinventing the wheel, reinventing the business model? What did you see from your customer experience?
I would see it as multifold, Pranjal, because one of the things was, I mean, even the customers and us both alike, right? We were in a shock, to be very honest, right? We were in a shock. In fact, we didn't know how to set up an online class, right? So customers are also like, we call someone for a class or a consulting assignment, you are face-to-face. And also system integrators here, I mean, most of their people are around the world working with the customer. And suddenly everybody is staying at home. How do you even do it, right? So that was the first invention itself. I mean, to be very honest and precise, right? In fact, Pranjal, you and I also remember we had the CWG event coming up at that point in time. Chris was supposed to travel, and that travel didn't happen. So finally, I mean, we did a half-a-day event. That was a patchy work, as you say, right? So we started with that patchy work, but within a month, what we also realized was focus dialogues are a key. Really understanding the need of the customer, like Andy said, okay, let's put everything aside. What is the final goal that we want to achieve, right? I mean, through this classroom or through this consulting assignment, while we can't be face-to-face, forget about the face-to-face or the video call or whatever it is. What is the final value that we want to achieve? So that's where, I mean, we started thinking about a value perspective. I guess even with the core working group for Safe in India, that was the thing that we started discussing. And through the dialogues, after 1 or 2 iterations, I mean, we were able to kind of find out, okay, collaboration is the key. That's what we want to achieve more than anything else, right? So that was very key for us. And another thing, that the second dimension that we also kind of focused is, now that I don't have few assignments or, I mean, few classrooms, where can I focus on? Right. So build a longer term products. So from Cyberbahn perspective, we are a platform partner. We had those tools in flight. We started focusing more heavily on that one, which actually helps customer on retrospectives. I mean, your inspect and adopt workshops. In fact, our product direction also we took in a different way. While it is called Lean Coffee Brew, it doesn't do lean coffee format meeting anymore, right? So it does inspect and adopt workshops. I mean, it also tries to help us in putting a backlog in a one place and so on and so forth. So we started taking that longer term view on, okay, when everything goes off, we were kind of sure that this will be a hybrid model. It may not be a complete face-to-face. It may not be a completely virtual organizations. What can we do for that hybrid model was a pointer that we were working on.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess, and thanks for sharing this question, Jinsi, in the chat box. This kind of ties into the next question that I would want to come back to you for Andy. So when we figured out that we need to respond to a change, there is disruption. how would an organization that is run on SAFe determine whether this is a temporary change or whether this is something that we can wait out, or is this something that we need to act on immediately? Minor changes versus major changes. What would SAFe recommend, or any enterprise which runs on SAFe, how would they do it?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thanks, Jinsi, for your question. You know, no one knew, if we're completely honest, back in March, what was ahead of us. And I think, you know, just to share a thought on that, first of all, I think this is a classic situation where speed of decision-making was more important than perfection of the product we were offering. And if you look at the product that we first offered in March, or not in March, but in the months that followed, it was very much, what is the bare minimum we need to get our customers? And don't forget, we have two types of customers. We've got customers like Ashwini, who we want to get back training. And then we've got the ultimate end customer, the people that he's training, those that are practicing SAFe. So what is the minimum that we need to get them back to being able to do that? And where do we want to put our efforts first? So looking across all the courses that are needed, which are the ones that people need the most, which are the ones that people partake in the most? If you look at the current solution that we have through SAFe Collaborate, it's very elegant. If you look, Jinsi, back at what we did in the months that followed the disruption, it was literally, as Ashwini mentioned, some PowerPoint slides that could be loaded into Google Drive and run remotely. But that didn't matter, because speed of getting something to market outweighed the need to get something that was perfect. And then I guess coming back to Pranjal's question, you know, when we think about SAFe is based on lean agile practices. Agile gives us this iteration, this cadence. So this ability to try something, deliver it, get feedback, and then make adjustments. And we always knew that if this first offering wasn't the right thing, we had other iterations in which we could deliver improvements. We had other PIs in which we could realign to something else. But the other thing that's really important about SAFe is the lean piece of it. And lean really gets us to focus on small batches. So we delivered lots of small batches, lots and lots of small batches in the first few months that followed. Slide decks, webinars about how to train remotely, tools that trainers could use, toolkits that SAFe practitioners could download to help them deliver PI planning remotely successfully. So for us, it was about breaking the problem down into small pieces, delivering lots and lots and lots of small pieces of benefit, and getting feedback continuously to then think about what that longer term strategy is going to be in terms of building a more holistic set of products. And just to reiterate, we really didn't mind in those first few weeks and months that what we were delivering was a little rough around the edges, because I'm sure Ashwini would tell you that it's better to have something than nothing at all. So we were really emphasizing the need to get something out there quickly, knowing that we always had the opportunity to iterate and improve based on the feedback that followed.
Very interesting point, Andy. And I think we would also like to hear from everybody over here. Just maybe spend another 4 to 5 minutes hearing about your stories. Like, how were you able to respond to the disruption, and what were the opportunities that you counted on at that point of time? How did you respond? If anybody would want to unmute yourself and share.
Maybe I'll get started, right, Pranjal? And this is very interesting because I got my first SAFe certification in that exact period. So I had registered for a training in the month of March, and because of this sudden change, the entire training kind of got cancelled, and then I had to keep waiting for a revised date. And I probably did my leading SAFe training in April, and that was same thing, Google Drives and Zoom, and and we were trying to figure out. And honestly, so just keeping in the same context, right? I did question whether it would be as valuable, because in the past as well, right? Any of these trainings and conferences I've been to, one of the key takeaways from that is the collaboration, the networking, the connect, the conversation with the other people who are in the same boat doing similar things, right? So that was something I felt was, oh my God, now doing this online, how is that going to actually make a difference? But somewhere that worked. I could learn, I could clear the exam, and I think I did get hooked to SAFe from then. So I think it did work, Andy. So I think I'm one of your proof points that the initial batches of doing this differently did work. Now, from our organization perspective, or exactly from my, my company and what we did, honestly, others are there. I mean, there's Prashant here, there's Priji, there is, Murtuza joined us later, Nisha joined us later, but you all can actually add, or you all probably had a different perspective. We didn't really see a lot because ours was already organization. It's an IT organization catered to multi-location and catering to the US location. We being a vendor organization, we're used to constantly being on calls. Meetings were always being held on Teams. So that's transition from sitting in office to moving to home honestly did not even feel a lot different till after some time you suddenly start missing the water cooler conversations and all of those kind of things, right? So honestly, as an organization, I didn't see a lot of disruption per se. Our transition was very smooth. We moved very smoothly into this new model. Prashant was conducting trainings at that point in time. And I know, Prashant, you probably went through a lot of this because these were in-person trainings and how those could change. But otherwise, we moved pretty much smoothly, yeah.
Interesting. And I guess, I know that a lot of the organizations, so good that it worked for Majesco because you were already prepared. But I know for sure there were a lot of organizations who actually struggled at that point of time. It wasn't as smooth as it possibly was for Majesco. So good that you always had that plan in place around being very centric to the customer needs. Moving on to the next topic of discussion that we had around collaboration. And maybe let me come back to you, Ashwini, again. What have you seen in terms of the collaboration? Now, we specifically going to talk about collaboration. What have you seen evolve? Like how, of course, you touched upon the phases in the initial days, and that was related to the training business. But can you also share a bit more about the other parts of the businesses? How have you seen that evolve with your organization and with customer organizations as well?
I'll connect it back to what Jinsi just now talked about, right? I've seen the very positive frame of mind in some of the organizations which actually help this collaboration. I think, we in fact understood the meaning of planning over plan in this phase. Right. So we used to say planning over the plan, but we can't really make any plan and be very sure and of being successful. Right. So we always had to iterate. We always had to plan multiple times. And this positive frame of mind is where I see the collaboration really worked. Right. So we had to have, even for a simple training earlier, it was like, okay, you plan for the training, go that day morning, half an hour before, you enter the room and you see, okay, people pouring in, start at the time and end it out. But now with the online thing, so to say, we had to connect even before. If it is for one organization, we used to connect 1 week before and get familiarized ourselves with the Zoom, get ourselves familiarized with the various chat window and so on and so forth. Luckily, if you see today, we didn't have to do that housekeeping thing, right? So 1 year after, now we don't have to do this housekeeping thing. And another thing that has helped us a lot is a connotation that a tool is a bad thing or one tool versus another tool. All that discussions were put to the back of the mind. And now tool became an enabler for you. Do you want to use Zoom? Do you want to use Teams? Do you want to use Google Meet? It's fine, perfectly fine. As long as we can see each other face to face. And maybe in some of the classes, breakout rooms are a necessity. I think we even there also we had workarounds from some of the organizations. They kind of created 3 meetings and they had a facilitator who would take care of those options. So I think we came a long way, right? I would say that growth mindset of being open to ideas is really helped us on the collaboration front.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Ashwini. And let me come back to you, Andy. And I know that in your role, it's part of the framework team. You do a lot of customer research in Gemba. And we all understand that most of these events that we see as part of a safe organization or safe enterprise, they are actually dependent on the success of the collaboration, right? If you look at any of the ceremonies, they are very dependent on how successful those collaborations are. So what did you see and hear from the customers at that point of time, and how did we respond to those those to ensure that the customers are not disrupted?
Yeah, it's a great point, Pranjal. And even to make that point, to kind of double down on it, if you had gone to the PI planning, let's use PI planning as an example. It's a well-known event. It has all the collaboration aspects that Pranjal mentioned. If you'd gone to the framework article prior to March, it very specifically talked about PI planning being a face-to-face in-person event, ideally. One of the interesting things that we heard from customers with having to run these events remotely is it does actually create complete parity across the people partaking. And what I mean by that is previously there might have always been, Pranjal, maybe yourself or me or someone else who was the remote team dialing in to an in-person PI planning. Well, now everyone was remote. So the funny thing that it's done is actually create this complete parity across everyone who's taking place. Now, the tooling that Ashwini mentioned is how we can actually conduct things like PI planning remotely. One of the things that I do see is a struggle, and it's harder to simulate in the remote version, is any emergent discussions. So I think when you're working remotely, you can put meetings in the calendar. You can have real intentionality about, I want to speak to Pranjal. I'm going to message him on Slack. We're going to have a conversation. One of the challenges is you miss those conversations that happen just because Pranjal and I were walking across the room and I happened to hear him say something and I knew that I had something to add. So one of the things we were working hard at, Pranjal, when we were putting some of the guidance around remote PI planning, for example, is how can we actually make time and space for some of these more emergent conversations? Because really they're not going to happen by accident. The conclusion to all this, though, to kind of summarize is, although we put a huge emphasis on it as a collaborative in-person activity, number one, we've seen it being run very successfully remotely. We've been running it successfully ourselves as well. And secondly, if there's any time you need PI planning more than ever, it's now. If ever you need this ability to bring the whole organization together to plan every 10 to 12 weeks, it's in the middle of a disruption like this. Because as Ashwini mentioned, plans these days don't survive as long as they used to. Even 10 or 12 weeks seems like a lifetime given the current climate that we're working within. So we've seen the need is as high as ever. We've seen that it creates real parity across everyone that's taking place. It's those emergent conversations, though, that are the difficult ones. And I think we're still working out the best way to get those into the mix as well.
That kind of makes me think about the question that we all of us have on our mind, right? Is the virtual world going to stay? What would the world look like in the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? Would this be virtual? Would this be hybrid? Do you have your thoughts on that, and how are we going to be prepared for that? And while you talk about that, do you see any upsides or downsides of whatever model that you think would exist in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard this word hybrid a lot recently. We've talked about it, obviously, at Scaled Agile. I think there will be this hybrid situation emerging. What that looks like is still to be defined, but we can see today that there's training courses, as an example, where there are some people in person in a room, others that are dialing in remotely. And we've got to try and think of a way of creating an experience that services both those groups. I think there are some benefits we can take away from the experience we've all been through. One of the things we often do, just like Pranjal did at the beginning of this meeting, this panel discussion, is he put some expectations in place. So he said, put the questions in the chat, come off mute. And actually, I think that's a very positive set of behaviors when you enter a meeting or a collaborative event. Establishing some norms and some working agreements is a great thing to do. I think the other thing that this disruption has given us is a real appreciation for the times that we do have together. And I'm seeing more and more organizations putting time in the calendar for non-work activities. So just one-to-one or one-to-many or whatever it is, opportunities to come together as a group and talk about things that are happening outside of work. And on a very serious note, Pranjal, I've also seen a lot of companies using this as an opportunity to invest in well-being programs. So actually realizing that as we're working at home, it's very easy for work to take over your life-work balance. I think we're going to come out of this difficult time with much more emphasis on what it means to support employees and get a better well-being at work and as we interact with each other. So that's a really great positive from my side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think digital fatigue is a real thing now. in all our lives. And I was so happy to see our efforts, the Scaled Agile's efforts, and I'm sure everybody else is doing that too around the wellness program, the working group that we have now created at Scaled Agile to focus on the wellness for the employees. Let me try to understand from you, Ashwini. You have been working with all the customers and you have seen their journey over the last 1 year. What do you think are the current practices that the globally distributed teams are practicing? And maybe, I will also open that question up to all the participants.
Maybe I'll give just a quick view. I want to see myself there, right? So if I look back at my own career, 20 years back when I joined this industry, I worked with Nortel at that point in time. We used to have a Nortel phone in the office, and we collaborated through that phone, right? So technology has improved a lot, and I think we were following the follow the sun model throughout, at least in India, the global SIs, right, system integrators. So it was not a new thing, so to say, like Jinsy mentioned it out. I mean, it was not a new thing per se. And also, if you look at some of the very trivial things like work from home policies, internet reimbursement policies, many of the organizations had them in place, right? Now we are effectively using them. And in fact, many of those policies, like you mentioned, Pranjal, like it's part of the wellness and work-life balance programs as well. So we are kind of effectively utilizing those. Those policies were there somewhere in the book, but they are actually coming into the fore. I've also seen many of my HR friends being involved very heavily and invested in terms of looking at the holistic way. We keep on talking about lean thinking people, right? So that's really happening now. HR teams are coming into fore. We are trying to understand, I mean, what are the nuances they have to go through, right? So we never looked from an HR perspective, right? So human resources perspective. Now we are looking many of the issues from a very human perspective and a human nature. And trust me, every other call with the customer now, it's not a small talk. First 10 minutes, it's mostly about really understanding whether they are all well settled and stuff. It's okay, right? Out of the 30 minutes, if you are spending 10 minutes to talk about, are we good? Are we going in the right direction? It's okay to do that one, right? So that's kind of a thing. Earlier, it was less like, how's the weather? It's great. Okay, let's get on to the call, right? even on a call, or even if you meet face to face, it was about, I have my next meeting in 20 minutes, right? So it's always on the mind. I think slowly we are getting out of that mindset and shifting towards what's the value we are going to deliver end of the day.
Maybe the lack of human touch is making us more human.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else, would you want to share? How have you experienced this?
Yeah, Preeti here, if I may go.
Yep.
Sure, please.
Yeah. See, for me, it has been a very, very, multifold experience, I would say. Maybe from personal sense, from organization wide. If I talk about, I belong to industry advisor group. I used to travel a lot, multiple geographies, multiple CXOs and customer. And our way of connecting with them was very, very different, right? You get to know their culture, you get to know them, operating in their personal space. And COVID really actually pushed us being at home. But on the other hand, we as an organization, TCS, I thought we were really pretty much proactive, pretty much ready. Even location independent agile, we started thinking from many, many years ago, and which is a trademark now. So we thought that as a global advisor, many of us were actually in that comfort space, that how we would operate from home, with multiple people. The only major difference that happened, I would say, is yes, many of the customers who were, very used to operating in their personal space, in their office locations, for them, it was a little bit of a mind shift change. But then getting into migrating into this new way of working, it was relatively easy, I would say. But on the other hand, when we look at TCS, we are talking about 470,000 plus people. So moving to that last person, how do you help them settle down in their home? How do you make sure that, their personal wellness and well-being? In fact, in the second wave also, it is paramount, right? What we are thinking that probably we may not be going to a pure office in-person model or a virtual mode. Probably it's going to be somewhere in between. 25 by 25 is what our CEO says. So probably we'll see only 25% of the workspace, visiting the office. So I think it kind of, gives both in-person as well as virtual connect that we need. So yeah. But maybe this is the highest at a stretch I have stayed at home. I'm sure many of us would do that, would agree with that, right?
I guess before all of you joined, we were just discussing, Andy was mentioning that he has almost forgotten how we used to travel. And I always used to have 2 bags with me, one for international travel,
Correct.
one for domestic. And
Yes.
I don't even know where those bags are anymore. So, yeah. But thanks for sharing that, Preeti. Prashant, you want to share something?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Pranjal. And the moment Ashwini mentioned, right, those Nortel phone 20 years back, and having those Nortel phone itself was a privilege, right? So somebody having their Nortel phone on the individual desk, it was a privilege. Again, if you talk about work from home remote policy, the people, those who have rights to execute that policy, those were the privilege, right? And today, all we are the privileged people utilizing all those tools and policies from working from home and contributing to our organization. Talking about facing this transformation, I would say I was lucky enough. I was among the first batch of the SPC, which happened remotely in March 2020. So I was the first SPC batch, which happened remotely. And there I started applying few of those practices when I started taking the classes or PI planning. Unfortunately, that was a time when our organization has moved from the Skype to Teams. So most of us were not very comfortable or acquainted with the team features or the infrastructure. So I do remember my very first PI planning, I had set up a 3 different laptop next to me, creating 3 different virtual room, right? And then after, what I did is just keep eye on tools and what are the new features are getting in. So as Ashwini mentioned, being a tool provider, we also try to introduce some of the features which can help people to face this transformation. I also observed the Microsoft team itself has evolved a lot within a year time. Now there is an option for a host to create a breakout room, right? Now there is an option for a host to create a video photograph or the online photograph by using that collaborative channel, right? So just keep observing what are the new features are being launched, and that helps to keep stay tuned to these changes. That is what my inputs are.
Absolutely. I think you definitely brought in a different perspective over here, whether, some of the businesses which were relying on the collaboration tools, the Zooms of the world or the Teams of the world and Google Meets and what have you, they improvised themselves as well. They released so many features. And we saw the evolution of Safe Collaborate as well, back from the Weave days to Safe Collaborate as it exists right now, which helps you run pretty much all the safe events, right? So I think that evolution did happen over the past 1 year. We are in the last 14 to 15 minutes of our panel discussion. I want to be cognizant of our time, and let's spend this piece of the time to talk about and focus more on what is happening now and what does future hold for us, right? And I guess that would also bring us to the third section, which we talk about transforming the operating model as such, right? And maybe I'll come to you, Ashwini. If you think of the operating model transformation that you would have seen in the virtual world as is right now, what would that look like for you from your experience in this geography?
So at least in this geography, one major shift that I've seen is reskilling and cross-skilling, right? I do see more learners to some of the courses which we used to take, very rarely. Product management courses, right? APM course, I took one and I'm taking one more next week as well. I never used to have APM courses run in this region. Product owner, product management roles are again becoming prominent. It's not that people didn't have those skills, but they were so dived into their day-to-day delivery work that they didn't have the time and energy to invest in some other areas. Because there were shifts in some of the customers, I also see our customers reinvesting their people into learning part of it as well. I do see more and more of enterprise learning happening rather than individuals signing up for the class. In our batches, most of our batches are filled with the enterprises rather than in individuals actually signing up for the classes. That's one shift I see. It's a very positive shift. While all of these organizations had their own online tools and collaborative tools from like Udemy's and Skillsoft of the world, but we also see that shift of getting onto a new way of learning, getting onto these classes, and also it gives them a flexibility of Europe, India, and Singapore joining on the same day for the same class, right? So that also kind of increases their experience together in the sense, say 5 of those learners from an organization who are from different geographies can be in one class without traveling now. Earlier, more than the class expense, traveling expense was a huge hit for any of the organizations, right? So that's one very, very positive shift I see as well.
Sure. Coming back to you, Andy, when we think of a safe enterprise, how do you imagine that leveraging safe in these enterprises would help the enterprises successfully transform their operating models and help them be better prepared for number one, such disruptions to happen in future, and number two, be able to run businesses smoothly, business as usual?
Yeah, it's interesting question, Pranjal, because as I think about that, you know, different focus areas, I think, within the SAFE framework are often important at different times. And I think a number of them really show their importance during times like we're experiencing now, particularly as we're going through these disruptive times. One, of course, is, you know, we talk in SAFE about the dual operating model, the dual operating system, rather, where we have, and we recognize the hierarchy on one side, that's the organizational structure. It's the mechanisms through which we're hired, through which we're supported through our organizational, the time we spend with that organization. It manages the finances, the sales cycle. But on the other side, we talk about this network, this value stream network that's organized around our development efforts. And what we've seen through the last year or so is the real need to double down on this development value stream network. Because the thing that the network gives us is the ability to really flex as the work we need to do changes. We know the hierarchy plays an important role, but it's a very predictable, stable, structural part of the company. The development value stream network is the thing that can flex around the needs of our customers. And then the other thing I think that's really come to the fore through this disruption is what I'd call strategy agility, and what we talk about in the framework is strategy agility. So team level agile is critical. They're the people doing the work to create the solutions that delight our customers. But strategy agility really talks to what it is we need to excel at to get through the challenges like the ones we're facing now. And that's all about the market research we talked about, connecting to the needs of the customers, but then being able to pivot the strategy quickly and effectively to move to work on the right thing. And one of the things we talk about in SAFE connected to strategy agility is this lean startup cycle, if you like. We know that the bets we're going to make aren't always going to be the things we need to deliver. Let's start working on something. Let's deliver an MVP. Let's test it. If it's the right thing to do, let's keep investing in it. If not, let's drop it and move to something else. So organizations really now are focusing on testing hypotheses, defining MVPs, seeing if things work, and if not, pivoting to something that will. So trying to move away from this traditional project mindset where we define a long-term deliverable, a big piece of work, to this more build, measure, learn type approach. And I think all those things, Pranjal, play a critical role in really helping us navigate not only this disruption that we're going through, but putting us in a better place when we come to tackle the disruptions that we're bound to see in the future, hopefully not caused by the same issues we've had this time, but digital disruption is all around us. So there never will be a time where things are completely stable.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And, you know, all these behaviors that we expect, this could be done by building the right capabilities within the organizations. And, you know, it's a question to both of you, Andy and Ashwini. What do you think would be the capabilities that the organization would need to develop to be able to, you know, practice or be more resilient to any such disruptions and thrive in the business going forward?
If I can,
Ashwin, you want? Yeah, go first. Yeah.
So yesterday I was just showing the TOS metric to one of my customer, and they were like, "This is what we need now." again, SWOT analysis is something, I mean, we keep on doing for the sake of doing, I mean, many a times. Now the TOS metrics, I mean, which kind of puts that into perspective of what are the internal and external challenges, threats, opportunities that you have, right? The customer was very happy to see and said, every month, maybe when we'll have to keep on revisiting this metrics and see where do we want to go next, right? So at least at a higher level, because second wave was, again, at least in India, I mean, 2 months back, we were thinking, I mean, it is all subdued now. I mean, we are going to get back to almost normal. It has very badly, even stronger than the first wave. But maybe we are resilient enough to say that, okay, we have seen it once, maybe this is worst, but this will also go off, right? So that growth mindset is something I have seen in the organizations which are surviving and plus thriving as well, where you are using the same tools, but at the same time, when you are making use of those tools and you are making use of iterating through those tools, like Andy is saying it again and again, that iterating through this process is more important than finding out a perfect plan. And we now know that there is no perfect plan, as simple as that.
Andy?
Yeah, and just, I mean, that absolutely agree with what Ashwini has said. And maybe the one I'd add to that is the learning organization. I think the learning organization, and we describe that in SAFe as part of the continuous learning competency, is the continuous learning culture competency, is going to be one of the real emergent management models going forward. So when we talk about a learning organization, we talk about an organization that excels at sharing knowledge and skills across the organization. They're always challenging their current approaches. They're thinking about how can we change the way we do work? How can we experiment with new ways of working? They're challenging their existing models and operating models. They take a real systems thinking approach. So they're looking holistically at the organization and what it's trying to achieve. And they're always generating and making best use of data. So when they're building new solutions, they're building them with how we're going to measure and collect feedback in mind. They're connecting to the customers as we started the conversation, and they're using that information, whether it's positive or negative, to continuously learn and adapt. And because they've got this learning organization mindset, they're never sitting still. So there's no complacency. Success is one of the biggest breeders of complacency. We're doing well today, we expect to do well tomorrow. The learning organizations is always looking, where can we make the next improvement? And I think if we start embodying this mindset of being lifelong learners at all parts of the organization, from the leadership through to the teams, and importantly, if we make time for intentional learning. So one of the things we talk about, Pranjal, is that learning and innovation isn't just an afterthought. It's not something that just happens by accident. We make time and space for it. So these organizations are really investing time and space to let this learning take place. And I think that's going to be one of the real management paradigms going forward, is this idea of a learning organization.
Definitely, great point. And I think all this, while as part of the conversation sounds simple, it definitely is not. It's a mammoth task and it's a journey. We can never be said that we are now a learning organization. We are now a business agility organization, right? I think it's a continuous transformation. We have to continuously evolve. And in all this evolution and coming out of disruption and coming out of waves after another waves that is hitting, especially in this part of the world, I think it's very important to ensure that the customer centricity, the point that you started off with, and the customer centricity remains intact. And I guess I will open up it to you, Ashwini, and to all the participants as to how is it that you are going to ensure, what are the plans that you have put together as the enterprise leader and your enterprise to ensure that the customer centricity is going to be intact while the transformation of the operating model is happening? Ashwini, do you want to kick it off first, and then we can open up to others?
I have only one line, Pranjal. In fact, I mean, this event itself, right? So we started with the thought of a webinar, but later we thought that if we make it a generic webinar, again, there is a video fatigue and nobody is going to join. Rather, why not make it a focused event for our customers and make it an invite-only event, right? So we are also thinking about the same approach with our customers. Focus on, I mean, what is important for them. Don't throw out jargons of, okay, this worked for someone else, right? So make it very, very focused, very meaningful for them. I think that's what is going to be the new meaning of customer centricity, on giving that focus back to the audience rather than pushing our agenda. right? So that's how I would see the customer centricity going forward.
Sure. And as Andy mentioned, I guess on the chat earlier, that we have limited time, so we have to keep focusing on the value. Like, what is the real value that we want to achieve in this time box? Anybody else, would you want to share, like in your delivery organization, product organization that you're part of, how have you planned for being customer centric while all this transformation happens in the operating model?
Okay, if no one else, I may take it up.
Yes, please.
Sure, please, go ahead, please.
So one of the theme that we TCS have undertaken is growth and transformation partner. I mean, of course, we always have been working very closely with our customers, but the trend that we have seen picking up so well, it's not that it was not there, but which has really picked up so well is kind of how do we co-innovate? How do we work very closely with customer by even remote innovations? Themes or innovathon, we have a concept called living agile. So how do we take the problem statement in our hands and really work towards making some of the agile ways of working and technique work. So many such collaboration is actually happening. In fact, barring apart the traveling part, probably it has opened up a very new paradigm and possibilities, right? Pretty much anybody can interact, collaborate with anybody everywhere. So that is one way we are trying to enhance on that aspect, that how do we become much more closer to our customer in that sense, and how do we co-innovate. That's one. And of course, I think Ashwini, Andy, many of the points were discussed here. Learning organization, health and well-being. So if you really see our customer also, for example, GE Healthcare, they took up the ventilator project, right, which is much more purpose-centric. Similarly, many of our customers, we are a service industry, and all of our customers are focusing on, societal aspects, purpose-led transformation, and that's where we are, planning to partner more. So these are some of the key things that, we ourselves are undertaking as an organization. Thank you.
Great points. Thanks for sharing that, Preeti. I know we are almost at the top of our hour. We started 5 minutes late, so maybe we can spend 2 more minutes to kind of have the closing thoughts. So final words, Andy and Ashwini, what do you think? What is the way to go forward for the globally distributed agile teams in this context?
Well, maybe I'll just jump in quickly. I mean, I think I love the point that Ashwini made earlier about maximizing the value piece. But I think, if this disruption has taught us anything, it's taught us that the future is uncertain. And it's more uncertain now than it's probably ever been. What I think we need to focus on is building the processes and systems that will allow us to be adaptable, rather than trying to build the exact right solutions that we need right now. So we've got to try and move to a way of working that allows the right solutions to emerge through things like the innovation we talked about, the feedback loops, the iterations, the small batches, knowing that what we're building today won't likely be the solutions that serve our customers in the next 5 or 10 years. So I think, when we do the training, Pranjal and Ashwini, that we start by talking about digital disruption. Well, this has probably been the biggest test of lean agile ways of working that we've ever seen before. And it's really made us realize that we've got to put these ways of working in and across the entire organization so we can be more adaptive going forward. So I think that's what I would say, Pranjal. Focus on creating these adaptive systems that will support us the next time we have to face and manage this disruption.
Focus on adaptive systems. All right, Ashwini. And then you can help close us as well.
I will just quote a book from Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile. He wrote it a few years back. We were all waiting for that Black Swan event. So it just happened, right? I mean, it comes out of the blue and it just happens, right? So I think that's a way to go forward in terms of not really knowing what is next, but at the same time, like Andy said, build those adaptive systems where you can leverage those systems to be adaptive, right?
Perfect. Awesome. So I would like to thank all of you for your participation today. I think this was a good discussion and really appreciate you taking time. Ashwini, Andy, and I would continue to have this dialogue with you in your own organization enterprise context. So, we'll be happy to connect with you. I think we are already connected with most of us. But yeah, in case there is anything that we can help you with, please feel free to let us know, and we'll be more than happy to ensure that you have the right support that you probably need. Ashwini, any final thoughts?
Yeah, connect us on LinkedIn. I think Scaled Agile and Cyberbahn, connect to us on LinkedIn. You would know what we are doing to kind of move through these disruptions. Let's share our thoughts and stay connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the final point that I would like to call out is that we are not alone. I wouldn't want you to consider that you're alone in this journey. There's so much of support available. Of course, Cyberbahn is one of our partners, and we have been engaging directly with the customers as well to consult and then ensure that you have the right assistance. So whichever way you feel comfortable, I just want to let you know that there is support available around you, and we'll be more than happy to extend that to you.
Thanks, Ashwini. Thanks,
All right. With that,
you.
Thank you so much, everyone,
Thank
for
you
your
so
time
much.
today. Take care and stay
Stay
safe.
safe. Yeah, stay safe. Thank you so much.